There was a time when I believed every meaningful thing announced itself. I thought the moments that altered a life would arrive with unmistakable weight, that they would introduce themselves with certainty, leaving no room to question whether something important had just happened. I expected transformation to sound like thunder, to feel dramatic, to divide existence into a clean before and after. I don't believe that anymore. The things that truly change us almost never arrive that way. They slip into ordinary days, wearing ordinary faces. They settle into conversations that seem forgettable while they're happening. They hide inside pauses so small they almost disappear before we notice them. They become part of the rhythm of our lives, long before we recognize that the rhythm itself has changed. That's what unsettles me now. Not that something changed, but that I can't identify the exact moment it began. I have searched for it more times than I care to admit. I've replayed conversations in my mind, examined quiet moments from every possible angle, tried to locate the first fracture in the version of myself I thought I understood so well. But every time I think I've found the beginning, another memory appears behind it. Then another, then another. Eventually I have to admit something that feels almost impossible to accept. Maybe there wasn't a beginning. Maybe there was only a point where I finally became aware of something that had already been growing beneath everything I thought I understood. Awareness has always been strange to me. People talk about seeing things as though sight is simple. It isn't. Looking at something and truly noticing it are completely different experiences. Most of us spend our lives surrounded by realities we never actually perceive. We move through familiar places without observing them. We speak to familiar people without recognizing the countless versions of them that exist beneath whatever role we've assigned them. Recognition is rarer than people realize. Not because the truth hides, because we're usually too occupied with expectation to see what has been there all along. Expectation is loud. Recognition is almost silent. That's why it's so easy to confuse one for the other. You think you're discovering something new, when, in reality, you're simply becoming capable of seeing what was always waiting. I've wondered if that's what happened here. Not between us. Within me, because it would be easier if I could say, you changed everything. There's comfort in believing another person transformed your world. It creates a simple story, a clear cause, a visible turning point. But honesty refuses to simplify itself. The truth feels more complicated than that. I don't think you built something inside me. I think you illuminated rooms I'd been walking through in darkness for years. The rooms were already there. I simply hadn't turned toward them. That's an uncomfortable realization. Not because it blames anyone, because it removes every excuse. If those parts of me already existed, then I've been living beside them without acknowledging them. How many other things have I overlooked simply because I never learned how to look correctly? That question follows me more than I'd like. It appears unexpectedly. While I'm walking, while I'm listening, while I'm sitting in silence, doing nothing at all, it reminds me how fragile certainty really is. We love certainty because it feels solid, but certainty isn't always evidence. Sometimes it's only repetitions. Sometimes we've believed something for so long that we've stopped asking whether it remains true. I've become suspicious of everything I accepted too quickly, even myself, especially myself. It's strange how confidently we introduce ourselves to the world. We say, "This is who I am," as though identity were a completed sentence, as though we've reached the end of a story that's still being written every single day. I don't know who taught us to speak with that kind of confidence. Maybe certainty makes people comfortable. Maybe admitting we're still discovering ourselves sounds too unstable. But I don't think stability has ever depended on certainty. I think it depends on honesty, and honesty often sounds uncertain. I don't know exactly who I am. I know fragments, patterns, instincts. I know the direction my mind naturally moves when left alone. I know the questions that refuse to disappear. I know the silence I return to whenever the world becomes too loud. Beyond that, everything feels unfinished. Perhaps it always will. I used to fear unfinished things. Now I think they might be the only honest ones. Completion suggests there's nothing left to discover. I don't believe that's true for anyone. Every person is an unfinished conversation with themselves. Some simply stop listening before it ends. I almost did. Life has a remarkable ability to distract us from our own interior. There is always another responsibility, another deadline, another conversation demanding attention, another expectation asking us to perform a version of ourselves that fits comfortably inside someone else's understanding. Days become weeks, weeks become years. Eventually, the performance begins to feel authentic, not because it's real, because repetition can imitate reality frighteningly well. Then something happens, not dramatic, not catastrophic, just enough to interrupt the routine, enough to make the familiar suddenly appear unfamiliar, enough to create a question where certainty used to live. That single question changes everything, because questions have gravity. Once they exist, they begin pulling other questions toward themselves. Before long, you're standing in the middle of thoughts you never intended to think. That's where I found myself, not lost, not broken, just interrupted. The interruption wasn't unpleasant. It was precise, like discovering that a clock you've trusted for years has been running 2 minutes slow. Nothing appears different at first. The hands still move, the gears still function, life continues, but once you know, you can never unknow it. Every glance reminds you. Every hour carries the awareness that something subtle has shifted. That's how understanding works. People imagine revelation as an explosion. I think it's closer to calibration. A small adjustment, barely visible, until you realize every measurement afterward has changed. I've started measuring differently. Not success, not failure, not progress. Presence. Real presence. The kind that can't be performed, the kind that exists even when no one is trying to create an impression. I've noticed how rare it is. Most interactions happen between carefully arranged versions of ourselves. Polished, fielded, adjusted, not because people are dishonest, because vulnerability feels expensive. We've learned to negotiate every conversation before it begins. How much should I reveal? How much should I hide? What version of myself belongs here? What parts should remain invisible? These calculations happen so quickly, we mistake them for personality, but they're often survival. Years of adaptation disguised as authenticity. I understand why. The world isn't always gentle with sincerity. People misunderstand what doesn't resemble them. They simplify complexity because complexity requires patience. It's easier to assign labels than remain curious. Easier to assume than observe. Observation demands restraint. It asks us to wait before deciding who someone is. Waiting has become uncommon. Everyone wants conclusions immediately. Definitions, carses, explanations, as though understanding were something you could rush. I've never trusted rushed understanding. Anything meaningful takes longer than we expect. Trees, languages, trust, recovery, perspective. None of them respond well to urgency. Neither do people. We're slower than we admit, not intellectually. Existentially, it takes years to understand a sentence someone said casually. It takes decades to appreciate sacrifices our parents never explained. Sometimes it takes an entire lifetime to recognize what mattered most. Time doesn't merely pass. It develops perception. That's why memories change, not because the past changes, because we do. The same memory means something different, depending on who remembers it. I've revisited moments I thought I understood completely, only to discover meanings that couldn't have existed for the version of me who first experienced them. Perhaps every memory is unfinished, too, waiting patiently until we become capable of understanding another layer. I wonder how many layers exist beneath this moment. How many truths are quietly forming that neither of us could possibly recognize yet? That thought doesn't frighten me. It humbles me. There's freedom in accepting that understanding is always incomplete. It means I don't have to force certainty where curiosity would be more honest. Curiosity leaves room. Certainty often closes doors before we've looked inside. So I've stopped trying to solve everything immediately. I've started allowing questions to remain questions. I've learned that unanswered doesn't always mean unresolved. Some answers arrive only after we've become someone capable of carrying them. Before that, they would only be information, not understanding. There's a difference. Information fills the mind, understanding rearranges it. And once the mind rearranges itself, nothing ever returns to its previous position. Not completely. Some changes are invisible from the outside. They're the deepest kind. No announcement, no dramatic declaration. Just a quiet shift in the architecture of thought. One day you notice that the world feels familiar, yet you're meeting it with different eyes. Not because the world transformed overnight, because you did, slowly, silently, almost without realizing it. And perhaps that's the only kind of transformation that truly lasts. I used to believe that if something mattered enough, I would recognize it immediately. That certainty would arrive before commitment. That understanding would always precede change. But life has never followed that sequence. More often than not, it changes you first, and only much later allows you to understand what happened. That's why memory feels so alive. It isn't a museum where the past sits untouched behind glass. It's more like a landscape that reveals different paths every time you return to it. The places remain the same. The person walking through them doesn't. I've been returning to old versions of myself recently. Not because I miss them, because I'm trying to understand how they survived carrying questions they couldn't answer. There was a version of me that believed distance solved everything, not physical distance. Tenal distance, the space between feeling something and admitting that I felt it. I became skilled at creating that space. So skilled, in fact, that eventually I mistook it for strength. There's a dangerous comfort in believing that nothing can reach you. You begin calling isolation independence. Silence becomes discipline. Detachment starts looking like wisdom. From the outside, it appears composed. From the inside, it's much quieter than peace. I've spent enough time there to know the difference. Peace has warmth. Isolation only has absence. The two can look almost identical until you've lived through both. That's the strange thing about appearances. They rarely lie. They simply don't tell the whole story. A calm face can hide an exhausted mind. A confident voice can carry years of uncertainty beneath it. Someone laughing can be protecting a silence they've never shown anyone. We become fluent in disguises without realizing we're learning the language, not because we enjoy pretending, because life rewards consistency more often than authenticity. People feel comfortable when they think they know what to expect from you. Predictability creates trust, or at least the appearance of it. But human beings aren't predictable, not honestly. We're contradictions learning how to coexist inside a single body. We want closeness while fearing exposure. We seek understanding while hiding the parts most in need of being understood. We ask others to see us while carefully controlling what remains visible. I've done it too. More times than I can count, not through deception, through selection. Showing the parts that fit comfortably into conversation, leaving the rest untouched, not because they were shameful, because they were difficult to translate. Some experiences don't become smaller when you explain them. They become less accurate. Language is remarkable, but it has limits. There are moments where words resemble maps drawn from memory, helpful, imperfect, always leaving something essential beyond the page. I've wondered whether every person carries an inner landscape no language has ever fully reached. A place built from sensations instead of sentences, from intuitions instead of definitions, from countless experiences layered together until they become impossible to separate. Maybe that's why genuine understanding feels so rare. We're constantly translating ourselves, thought into language, language into interpretation, interpretation into another person's perspective. Something is always lost along the way. And yet, sometimes, against every reasonable expectation, enough survives the translation, not perfectly, not completely, but sufficiently enough for another person to pause, to recognize something they can't explain. Those moments stay with me, not because they're dramatic, because they're improbable. The odds of one mind accurately touching another are astonishingly small. We're shaped by different histories, different fears, different hopes, different ways of assigning meaning to the exact same experience. Two people can stand beneath the same sky and remember entirely different evenings. And yet there are moments where perspective overlaps so naturally it feels less like communication and more like recognition. Recognition has become one of my favorite words, not because it sounds beautiful, because of what it asks from us. Recognition doesn't demand ownership. It doesn't require agreement. It doesn't insist that two people become identical. It simply says, I see that this exists. Nothing more, nothing less. Maybe that's all any of us have ever wanted. Not to be admired, not to be idealized, not even to be understood completely. Just recognized honestly, without exaggeration, without reduction, without someone reshaping us until we fit neatly inside their expectations. I've noticed how quickly people replace observation with assumption. Someone says one sentence. Immediately, we decide who they are. They hesitate once. We invent an entire personality around that hesitation. A single conversation becomes a permanent identity. We're impatient observers, perhaps because uncertainty makes us uncomfortable. If we don't know someone yet, our minds rush to complete the picture. Incomplete images create tension. The imagination fills empty spaces faster than patience ever could. I've become suspicious of those automatic conclusions, especially my own. Every time I think I've figured someone out, I ask myself one question. What haven't I seen yet? That question has changed the way I move through the world. It reminds me that every person contains rooms, They've never opened in front of me. Every conversation happens beside countless unspoken ones. Every smile has a history. Every silence has context. Every certainty deserves another look. The older I become, the less interested I am in certainty. Curiosity feels more alive, more generous. Certainty ends conversations. Curiosity keeps them breathing. I've met people who knew exactly who everyone else was. They could explain every motive, predict every decision, categorize every personality. They always sounded convincing. They also seemed strangely disconnected from the people standing directly in front of them. It's difficult to notice someone while you're busy explaining them. Explanation can become another form of distance. Observation requires presence. Presence asks us to postpone judgment. That has become increasingly difficult in a world obsessed with immediate answers. Everything must be decided quickly, liked or disliked, trusted or rejected, successes or failure. We divide reality into simple categories because complexity takes time. But life has never been simple. It has only been simplified. There's a difference. A mountain doesn't become smaller because someone draws it on paper. Reality doesn't become less complex because we describe it in fewer words. Complexity remains, mentally waiting for someone willing to look long enough. I've started believing that attention might be the rarest form of generosity. Not attention given out of obligation, not attention driven by curiosity alone, but the kind that remains present without demanding immediate conclusions. The kind that listens beyond the sentence, that notices pauses, that recognizes changes too subtle for language. People often underestimate silence. They assume nothing happens there. I've found the opposite to be true. Silence is where unfinished thoughts continue speaking. It's where emotions separate themselves from reaction. It's where the mind quietly rearranges everything the conversation couldn't carry. Some of the most important realizations of my life happened hours after anyone had spoken, long after the room emptied, long after the moment itself ended. Understanding has its own pace. It refuses deadlines. Perhaps that's why wisdom appears slow. Not because wise people think slowly, because they allow reality enough time to reveal itself before deciding what it means. I've been trying to live that way, not perfectly, just intentionally. When something unsettles me, I no longer rush to remove the discomfort. Sometimes discomfort is information. Sometimes confusion marks the edge of understanding rather than its absence. We've been taught to eliminate uncertainty as quickly as possible. I'm beginning to wonder whether uncertainty is sometimes the doorway instead of the obstacle. Every meaningful transformation I've experienced began with not knowing. Not knowing who I would become, not knowing what something meant, not knowing whether I was ready. Knowledge arrived later. First came willingness. Willingness to remain present long enough for clarity to emerge naturally. That kind of patience feels increasingly uncommon. We're surrounded by speed, instant communication, instant opinions, instant conclusions. Everything accelerates except the human heart. It still learns slowly, still heals gradually, still trusts carefully, still changes one quiet moment at a time. Maybe that's why genuine transformation often feels invisible while it's happening. The heart doesn't announce each adjustment. It simply continues reshaping itself beneath ordinary days until one morning you realize your inner world no longer echoes the way it once did. You don't notice the exact moment the seasons change either. One leaf falls, then another. The air shifts almost imperceptibly. Light arrives differently. Nothing dramatic happens. Until suddenly, you recognize that the landscape has become something entirely new. Perhaps people change the same way, not through single events. Through accumulated moments, too small to measure individually, a conversation remembered, a silence respected, a truth finally admitted, a fear released. Each one almost weightless alone, together enough to alter the direction of an entire life. And maybe that's why I no longer search for the exact moment everything changed. Maybe the better question isn't when it happened. Maybe the better question is who I'm becoming because it did, because that answer is still unfolding. And for the first time in a very long time, maybe don't feel the need to rush it. There was a question I spent years avoiding, though I disguised that avoidance so well, I almost convinced myself it wasn't there. It wasn't a complicated question. In fact, it was painfully simple. What if the person I have been protecting isn't the person I actually am? For a long time, I assumed protection and identity were the same thing. The habits I repeated became my personality. The walls I built became my character. The distance I maintained became the story I told myself about strength. I never stopped to ask whether those things were protecting me or replacing me. There's an important difference between carrying armor, Rand, forgetting where the armor ends and your own skin begins. I think a lot of people reach that point without realizing it. We adapt to survive difficult seasons. We become quieter, more careful, less expressive, more independent. We convince ourselves these are permanent qualities because they've been with us for so long. But survival strategies aren't always identities. Sometimes they're temporary answers that stayed long after the question disappeared. I've been wondering how much of me belongs to old battles that no longer exist. How much energy am I spending defending doors no one is trying to open? How many conversations have I entered already prepared to protect myself from misunderstandings that were never going to happen? It's strange how the past continues speaking even after it has finished happening, not through memories alone, through habits, through instincts, through invisible expectations we carry into every new experience. A person disappoints you once. Years later, you hesitate before trusting someone entirely different. One difficult goodbye quietly influences every introduction that follows. One misunderstanding teaches you to explain yourself too much or not at all. Life leaves echoes. Some of them become so familiar that we mistake them for our own voice. I've started listening more carefully. Whenever I react strongly to something small, I ask myself another question. Who is responding right now? Is it the person standing in this moment? Or is it an older version of me, still expecting yesterday to repeat itself? The answer surprises me more often than I'd like. Sometimes I'm not responding to reality, I'm responding to memory. Mirror has incredible influence, not because it forces us, because it whispers quickly enough that we mistake it for intuition. I've learned not to distrust intuition, but to examine it. Real intuition brings clarity. Fear usually brings urgency. Those two feelings can look almost identical until you spend enough time noticing the difference. Fear insists, clarity waits. Fear demands immediate action. Clarity allows silence. Fear narrows your vision until only one outcome seems possible. Clarity somehow expands it. The more I pay attention, the easier it becomes to recognize which voice is speaking. That recognition has changed the way I experience people. I no longer expect them to heal parts of me they never wounded. That was never their responsibility. nor is it mine to carry wounds I didn't create. We're all inheriting stories that began long before we arrived. Families pass them forward, communities reinforce them, experiences reshape them. Eventually, we inherit ourselves, not the self we were born as, the self assembled from thousands of moments we rarely examine. Maybe becoming who we really are isn't about adding more. Maybe it's about noticing what was added without our permission, the beliefs, the fears, the expectations, the definitions that slowly attached themselves to us until we stopped questioning whether they belonged. I've been removing those definitions one by one, not rejecting them angrily, just holding each one carefully, looking at it honestly, asking, did I choose this? Sometimes the answer is yes, many times isn't. There's unexpected freedom in discovering that not everything you've carried was yours to begin with. It means putting something down isn't losing yourself. It might actually be the first step toward finding yourself. People often imagine growth as accumulation, more knowledge, more confidence, more experience, more certainty. Lately, it feels more like subtraction, less pretending, less noise, less attachment to who I thought I had to become, less fear of existing without immediate explanation. The quieter I become internally, the more clearly I hear things I overlooked before. Not voices, batas, small consistencies hidden beneath ordinary moments. The rhythm of someone's honesty, the weight behind words they didn't intend to emphasize, the difference between someone trying to impress you and someone simply being present. Presence has become increasingly important to me, not because presence solves anything, because it reveals things. You can't truly notice another person while planning your next sentence. You can't genuinely listen while preparing your defense. Attention requires surrender, not surrender of identity, surrender of assumption. That's more difficult than most people realize. Assumptions create efficiency. Observation requires effort. Effort requires humility. Humility admits, I might be wrong about what I'm seeing. That sentence has become unexpectedly comforting, not because I enjoy uncertainty, because certainty has disappointed me often enough to earn my caution. Every time I became absolutely convinced I understood reality completely, life quietly introduced another perspective. Not to embarrass me, to expand me. Expansion rarely feels comfortable while it's happening. A seed probably doesn't describe becoming a tree as peaceful. It breaks open first. Growth often begins where certainty ends. I've started welcoming that discomfort instead of resisting it. If an idea challenges me, I don't immediately defend my previous beliefs. I sit with the tension, sometimes for days, sometimes longer. Not every uncomfortable idea deserves acceptance, but every uncomfortable idea deserves examination. Otherwise, I'm not protecting truth. I'm protecting familiarity. Those aren't the same thing. Familiarity can become incredibly persuasive. It convinces us that repetition equals accuracy. But lies repeated often enough become habits. Truth rarely depends on repetition. It remains true whether anyone acknowledges it or not. That thought has changed the way I seek understanding. I'm less interested in agreement now. Agreement feels temporary. Reality doesn't depend on consensus. I've met people who disagreed with almost everything I believed, yet somehow helped me understand myself more honestly than those who agreed with every word I said. Perhaps challenge is another form of generosity. Not challenge meant to defeat, challenge meant to deepen. The kind that doesn't ask you to abandon yourself, only to look again. Looking again has become a practice at people, at memories, at assumptions, at myself, especially at myself, because self-awareness isn't something you achieve once. It's something you choose repeatedly. The person I was 6 months ago couldn't see certain things. The person I am today probably can't see everything either. That's strangely reassuring. It means I don't have to become complete overnight. I only have to remain willing, willing to notice, willing to question, willing to outgrow conclusions that once felt permanent. I've stopped treating change like betrayal. Changing doesn't mean the previous version of you was false. It means they carried you as far as they could. Every season of our lives teaches us something. The mistake is expecting one season to teach us everything. Winter can't explain spring. Spring can't prepare you for autumn. Each one reveals a different truth about the same world. Perhaps people work the same way. Every version of ourselves understands something the others couldn't. Instead of judging who I used to be, I've started thanking them. They survived experiences. I no longer have to survive. They made imperfect decisions using incomplete understanding. So am I, so is everyone. Maybe compassion begins there, not in excusing every mistake, in recognizing that every person is navigating reality with only the understanding they currently possess. Some expand it, some defend it, some never question it at all. I don't want to become someone who mistakes familiarity for wisdom. I don't want to stop growing simply because growth eventually becomes uncomfortable. I'd rather remain unfinished, open, curious, capable of being surprised by reality, because every time life has surprised me honestly, it has left me more human than I was before. And if there's one thing I know now that I couldn't have understood years ago, it's this. The strongest foundations are not built by people who think they've reached the end of understanding. They're built by people humble enough to keep looking, even after they believe they've finally found the answer.